This is a tiny island with a single oak tree, nestled in the middle of an infinite ocean. For the next 100 days I'm stranded here, with no food, virtually no resources and no friends, not even this guy. Not only must I survive, but I must also transform this barren island, transforming a tiny mound into an epic tropical civilization, while also attempting to collect the blocks released in the 1.21 update. Sounds easy, right? It's not. I don't even have any friends to help me, but at least I have a pig to keep me company. Upon arriving on the island, we'll first clear the single oak tree, salvage 20 planks, and then place a crafting table to craft the 3 early game items. To become wealthy, we'll need this pile of leaves, as we'll need a lot of wood later on. Finally, a sapling dropped, and while the yield isn't great, even with only 2 saplings, we've actually gained a forest. The few blades of grass on the island also dropped seeds. It seemed I'd eventually become a farmer. To keep my stomach from rumbling, I had no choice but to plunge into the dangerous ocean and catch some small fish for food. These fish also drop bones, an efficiency that would make even a fisherman weep. Deeper, even kelp could be a source of food. My next plan was to flatten the island and expand. After all, the island was too small, so we needed a lot of soil. Luckily, there was a mound nearby where the water wasn't too deep. After 2.5 years of hard work, my first shovel had burned out. I was out of wood, so I started breaking down some bone meal to quickly deprive the young trees of their childhood wood. 1 tree felled, and I earned 3 more seedlings. The first night arrived as promised, and I was ready to begin building my luxurious shelter. Although it looked rather rudimentary, my island soon welcomed its first guest. For the sake of my house, I had to fight it until it turned into a wax bar. Then I prepared to start digging tunnels in search of minerals. On the first night, I entered the Stone Age. I upgraded my draft, then discarded it, forgetting my roots, and continued digging in the dark. Finally, I stumbled upon coal, which I transformed into a torch, bringing light back to the island. I also built a furnace to cook some food. Continuing my mining, I found precious dirt. Its rarity now surpasses diamonds in my eyes. I dug 2.5 stacks of dirt in one go. By the time I returned to the surface, it was already the second day. Finally, I could begin my second plan, expanding the island. However, I could only cover a small area. With no more dirt, I had to shovel out all the water around it. After a busy day, I finally made it half as wide as before, allowing me to plant more saplings and expand my shelter. The tunnels I dug earlier had actually started spawning monsters. My biggest fear in this game is creepers destroying my buildings. The next night, I had to go back to the tunnels and dig vertically downward using my spiral mining method. I didn't miss any copper I found, since 1.21 seems to have updated copper ornaments. Continuing to dig, I also found iron. Luckily, I got 11 pieces. Using Astral Soul, I spotted a cave below. Following the path, I finally found my first mine. I've been digging a little more iron lately to upgrade my equipment, but I'm also wary of monsters. I was lucky enough to find an abandoned mine not long into the game. Now that daylight had broken, I had to hurry up and expand the island. I accidentally hit a false hook rock and returned to the surface. I put all the iron I dug into the furnace to smelt it. I'm short on wood, so I'll give them a quick boost. Harvesting saplings will yield more wood. It'll become a wood factory sooner or later, but I'm so fucking short on dirt now. Why do I feel like I'm torturing myself by digging this pit? I kept digging for dirt and was attacked by zombie villagers. I even managed to get 2 of them at once, but I haven't reached the point of influencing the villagers yet, so I can only punish them. The mound below seems to have a lot of dirt. I'm going to drain the water in and dig it all up. If nothing goes wrong, I should get a lot of dirt this time. I'm already expanding the island, so collecting dirt was tedious in the early stages. I had to work like a slave for so long, digging for so long, and I only got 4 stacks of dirt. I didn't expect there was so much down there. I'll make a few boxes to store the things I don't need right now. I've also burned the nails I had earlier, so I'll make half a set of iron armor and upgrade the draft. Then I'll pick up the dirt that's been washed up by the water. It's enough to double the size of my island. On the third day, I continued expanding. This circle was much larger than before, and filling in the gaps required more dirt. I returned to the previous dirt pile to resupply. Damn, why are there monsters spawning again? I made a shovel and resumed my slave work. The only dirt pile I had almost empty. The sudden explosion of the coolies, just after returning to the surface, made things even worse. The next task was the boring block filling part. It was getting dark soon. I lit a torch to avoid monster spawns. Damn, an invisible wandering trader spawned. I traded with him, but unfortunately, there were no jungle-themed items. After a busy day, all this dirt didn't even fill the island. The rest of the day, I had to continue mining in the mines. The spider webs below could be used to craft wool into beds. After all, I needed to breed villagers later. With a little luck, there were gold butts in the mine chests. Now, I'm short on dirt, so I can only gather some sand. Back on the surface, I'll use 2 sand grains and 2 dirt grains to make 4 sand plots. Then, I'll place them on the ground and shovel them with a hoe to turn them back into dirt. Anyway, this sand plane is useless, so I'll smite it and get a leash. Since I'm running low on dirt, I can only tear down my mansion. The spider webs I just made are just enough to make 3 wool plots, which I can then use to make a bed. The saplings I've planted around here are growing, so I'll have no shortage of wood. I'll then combine all the dirt I've got into sand and use it to fill in the gaps. The island needs more expansion than it's currently, so it took 2.5 hours to clear all the trees and plant more small ones. The wood isn't nearly enough yet. After all that hard work, I can finally sleep on the island for the first time. After 6 days of survival, I've expanded this mediocre island by 10%. It's a mediocre island. I'm trapped here for the next 100 days, and during this time I need to gather enough resources to transform this pile of dirt into a perfect tropical civilization. In the previous stage of transformation, I'd already doubled the size of this island thanks to the nearby soil. Judging by the current situation, at least there's no shortage of wood. The mature wheat even dropped 3 seeds. It's time to reclaim the wasteland and build my first farm. Of course, the biggest lack right now is soil, so I'll just use a hoe to combine sand and soil. On the 5th day, I'll return to the mine to work, taking advantage of the night to dig for the minerals I need. The normally transparent sand now gleams like diamonds. I've only just discovered the vastness of this underground mine. I'm lucky enough to stumble upon a diamond. There's also a loyalty enchantment book in the mine chest. While I'm here, I'll also gather some cobweb for crafting beds and breeding villagers later. Back on the surface, it was already the 6th day. I combined more than 1 set of sand grains to create 3 sets of soil, encircling the island and continuing to expand. Even with all this, I only managed to create a small circle. I returned to the pile of dirt and became a slave. I wondered how much soil would be needed to build a tropical civilization. When I flashed back to the surface, it was already the 7th day. This time I harvested 2.5 sets of soil. I quickly filled the remaining space, but I only managed to fill it a quarter. The rest of the day was a repetitive process of filling blocks and digging soil. Then I remembered that I had previously burned copper ingots to craft copper doors and fire panel doors. At night, some black people stole my grass blocks. Damn, they even dared to tear down the island I had worked so hard to build. However, this also gave me grass blocks I could place anytime. Next, I returned to the mines. The next stage would require a large amount of ore. Yes, we also had to build a monster spawning tower. I hadn't expected there to be hidden soil on this level, its level of sophistication rivaling the one piece that Luffy encountered upon leaving the sea. After 2.5 minutes of digging, I felt like I was ready for monsters to spawn below. I went to the surface and continued filling, instantly doubling the island's size. Taking out the smelted copper, I crafted a copper pavilion mountain. These are the copper ornaments from NetEase update 1.21. Next, I used cobblestone to build a path out, creating a monster spawning tower about 20 blocks up, leaving a 3x3 block space in the middle to build high. Of course, this common monster spawning tower also requires a lot of stone. Without slaves to help, I had to dig and build it myself. At the beginning of this series, it was a bit tiring, but as I played later, I found it increasingly enjoyable. I extended the perimeter by 8 blocks and then built a wall. Since I didn't have any extra cobblestone, I had to use Fukasaka rock. Just this little bit took me 2.5 hours. When I ran out of cobblestone, I returned to the mine to replenish the stone. I built a stone column and then filled in the 4 corners. This area is where the monsters spawn. My fingers are numb from scraping the stone. Fortunately, I often encountered hidden dirt on this level, so I shoveled it all away. There were actually 3 sets of dirt. I came back and filled in the remaining dirt, finally turning the initially ordinary pile into a slightly larger one. Then I went to the monster tower to complete the rest of the process. I made an infinite water block and placed it at the end of the cross to flush monsters down. I also placed torches and doors around it to trick the zombies into thinking they were safe. After so long building, I finally reached the final step, the roof. My stone burned out before I was even finished. So let's create a zombie first-person perspective. The spawn monsters will fall into a trap and be swept down by the current. Furiously, I went to the mines and built 2.5 more sets of stone. Then I returned to the spawn tower and filled in the remaining space. I added some buttons to prevent monsters from spawning on top. After so much hard work, I finally completed the spawn tower. Now I just have to wait for the zombie villagers and witch to spawn. The watermelon seeds I got from the mine before returning to the island have also borne fruit. As the island expands, I need to light torches to prevent monsters from spawning. I've barely finished talking when I see 2 zombie villagers. I quickly craft a ship-herding artifact to control them until the witch appears, preventing them from being burned during the day. Then I'll build them a luxurious private room. Now all I have to do is wait for the monster spawn tower to appear, so the witch can heal the villagers. In my free time, I'll use bone meal to urge shaman on. This episode takes our tropical civilization a step further, surviving on a deserted island. I saw the monster spawn tower was full the moment I logged in. Sadly, the witch hadn't appeared in such a long time. I returned to the island and resumed my tree cutting work. Night fell again, and at dawn, I discovered the zombie villagers had also disappeared. I had no choice but to return to the mines to continue working. I'll probably have to stay in the mines and mine until the witch and zombie villagers spawn. I'll need to remove the railroad tracks to facilitate transporting villagers later. The island isn't big enough, so I'll need to continue removing sand. Spider webs are also necessary for spawning villagers. Removing all of it will allow me to build more beds. I was incredibly lucky to stumble upon 3 diamonds. After all this waiting, I didn't expect the witch and zombie villagers to spawn. I can only continue adding sand until it turns to mud, expanding the island and filling my empty day. Then it will spawn. The newly released wandering lead was another useless item. I put it to death and waited for its next appearance. I used bone meal to beautify my island, but returned to the monster tower, still no spawns. I doubted its usefulness for a moment. I continued to work in the mines repeatedly. On the night of the 15th day, a zombie villager finally spawned. I quickly built a high-level pavilion on the spot, using wooden planks to block the tower, and paused the monster tower. I released them from the nearby human hut, only to discover 2 zombie villagers. I just needed to wait for them to be freed from the anti-infection so they could breed. Now I just had to wait for the witch to appear. At dawn I finally saw a witch and quickly made an iron needle. Luckily, I had found a fate card in the mines, so I used a cold spell on the witch to prevent her from disappearing. I returned, retrieved my long-awaited golden butt and brought the zombie villager to the witch. Just get closer, wait for him to drop a potion of weakness, and then feed him a golden butt. The other one disappeared, so I needed to spawn another one from the monster tower. After waiting 2.5 minutes, it finally transformed back into a villager. Meanwhile, another one spawned from the monster tower. I released it first, then returned to the island to repair the area where the villagers were working and transported it over by boat. I didn't expect this guy to be so eager to work. From now on, I won't be the only slave on this island. I'll come back and transform my second zombie villager. I'll use spider silk to make a few more wool beds now. I already have enough for the previous one, so I'll skip the night and sleep. At daybreak, I'll bring my second villager back to the island. Evolved villagers are much cheaper to trade. I placed all the beds I'd made nearby, and threw some bread for them to breed, but they kept retracting halfway through. After 2.5 years of waiting, I finally witnessed the appearance of my first baby villager. I then renovated the breeding area, adding fire panel doors so the little villagers could drop down. Then I built a separate room, and filled in the empty space. There were signs underneath, so the little villagers wouldn't drown. Once I had enough villagers, I needed to build a villager exchange. After 19 days of survival, I had transformed this ordinary little island into this. Now 2 villagers were living on the island. Next, I needed them to breed and build the villager exchange. I planned to make a few profession blocks first. I'd scrape some rubble to make a construction table. Since both the cartographer and the librarian needed levels, the only way to find them was to search for shipwrecks. Not long into the row, I stumbled upon a surprisingly pleasant mushroom island, complete with a shipwreck beneath my feet. Unfortunately, there were only emeralds and a few pieces of iron inside. I hadn't expected this mushroom island to be right next to my island. If I'd known earlier, I wouldn't have had to work so hard digging gravel to make sand. But now it's dark, and I have to go home to make sure the villagers aren't infected by zombies. I also found a portal ruin along the way and took some exquisite equipment with. As soon as I got back to the island, I saw a little zombie. I elbowed him. After 2.5 years of waiting, these little villagers are finally grown up. It's time to build a villager exchange nearby. I'm planning to use deep slate to make a pure wind control. I'll put a torch door at the entrance to prevent villagers from wandering around. The rails I dug from the mines will also come in handy, but I'm still short on materials for the minecart. I went back to the mines to dig some iron, and when I returned to the surface, a wandering lead spawned. Damn, this thing never sells what I need. Continue the sanctions, taking the foreign woman away to obtain leather. Return and craft a minecart, making it much easier to transport villagers. Assign them to their posts, then destroy the minecart. Place the occupation block, and discover they haven't been hired. After all this time, the event happened too quickly, and another villager has chosen them. So we have to expand outwards and rebuild the post. Finally, the villagers have jobs. Then we go to the mines and dig some deep slate to create positions for the remaining villagers. The rest of the time is spent repeatedly transporting villagers. This only requires sticks in exchange for emeralds. By night, the remaining villagers have jobs. Unfortunately, we don't have time to craft a villager discount machine yet. We have to release zombies from the monster spawn tower, transport villagers there to be infected by them, then go home and burn some gold ingots to craft a golden butt. We then bring them to the witch and wait for her to throw a potion of weakness, which will heal them. The rest of the time we return to clean up the ranch. I made a few more shovels and prepared to head to Mushroom Island. Returning to the exchange was already on hold. I traded the sticks and waited for him to restock. I was so busy that it rained at night. I quickly made a few lightning rods out of copper to avoid thunderstorms. I dressed the villagers as witches and slept through the night. At dawn I set off for Mushroom Island. This time I brought a backpack full of shovels to shovel the island. After all, building an island requires